Hey guys, welcome back to another Super Unreal Power tutorial. Today, we're going to go over super speed. Super speed is actually really easy to do, so I didn't just want to do a short video about that. Instead, we're going to go over the basics of super speed, as well as several different ways that we can add some cool special effects to make your speedster look awesome while running fast. With that, let's dash right in. Alright, so the first thing that we did was open up a brand new project, but you can always add this to any existing project that you have too. Now we're going to need to add an action mapping for this ability, so let's go into our editor here, project settings, find input. We're going to add a new action mapping here. We're just going to call this one sprint. And let's just set this to the left shift key. Right, then with that, let's close it out. And now I'm going to add a new folder that we can put all of the blueprints that we create into. So right click in the content browser, add a new folder, and we're just going to call this sprint. Okay, now that we have our action mapping, we'll create the basic functionality for our sprint. And we're also going to add a simple stamina burn system too, just to spice things up. But first, let's grab our character here. Let's create a new variable, and we will call this isSprinting. We're going to compile and save, and we will leave its default value as false. So down here at the bottom, let's bring in our sprint input action. Probably hit that key a little hard. And then we're going to drag off 2 copies of isSprinting. Off of pressed, we're going to set it to true, and off of released, we are going to leave it as false. Next, we're going to need our character movement here. All right, now if we look at our character movement on the details tab here, we'll find our max walk speed, which is currently set to 600 here. Now we need to keep that in mind when we're making our character sprint, because after we're done sprinting, we have to set that back to whatever our base value here is. So off of our character movement, we're going to drag off and set max walk speed. We'll connect that, and let's actually copy and paste that and get a second node for when we release. When we release, of course, we're going to set that to 600. And for the example, I'll set that to 2400 so we can walk 4 times as fast here. Also, we don't want to forget to plug our character movement in as our target value here. And with that, we'll compile and save, and we can sprint here. Now the next thing that we want to do is create a stamina system. And how the stamina system is going to work is once we hit 0, we're going to stop sprinting. And then it'll also refill whenever we're not sprinting. So let's start with our variables here. Let's create 3 new float variables. First one being current stamina. Let's duplicate, and we'll call the second one max stamina. And then the last one is going to be stamina rate. And stamina rate is going to be how quickly we drain or add to our stamina bar. And we're going to set that to 1 for now. And now for our max, we're going to set the base value here for 100, and the same with our current stamina as well. Now we're going to need 2 new custom events. Let's move this down here real quick, actually, just so we have some space. Alright, let's create that first custom event. And we're going to call this add stamina. And then we'll just go right under the core function, and we're going to add our second custom event, and we're going to call this subtract stamina. Now back up to our add stamina function here. We're going to get a branch, plug that in, and we need to check if we're sprinting. And if we're not sprinting, we're going to add a branch again. And with the second branch, we're going to check if our stamina is above our maximum. So we'll drag off of the condition. We're going to add in a less than or equal to. Top value is going to be our current stamina. And the bottom value is going to be our max stamina. And if this is false, we're going to set our current stamina to our stamina plus our stamina rate. current stamina plus our stamina rate. Plug this in. Next we're going to add in a delay node, and instead of 0.2 we're going to change that to 0.1. So every 1/10 of a second we will add a point to our stamina bar when we are not sprinting, of course. And then lastly, right at the end, we want to add the same function. Basically, this function is only adding one stamina point, and so when we put this at the end, what it's going to do is it's going to cycle through this until we're back to our maximum. Alright, now that we're done with that, let's put a comment in it, and we're just going to call this add stamina. And now on to our subtract stamina function. So once again, we're going to throw in a branch, and we are going to check if we're sprinting. And this time off of true, we're going to add another branch. And this is going to check if we are greater than 0. Drag our current stamina in on the top. Now off of the true, we're going to set our sprinting to false. And then we're going to grab another copy of our character movement here, and we are going to set our max walk speed back to 600. Connect the pins. And at the end, we're going to add stamina here. Basically, what this is doing is, if we're no longer sprinting, then we want to go back to our add stamina function. And the function itself will handle stopping at the max stamina level. Now, back to our second branch node. If it's false, what we're going to do here is we're going to get our, or we're going to set our current stamina to our current stamina minus our stamina rate. So what's going to happen is while we're sprinting, our stamina is actually going to go down, which is exactly what we want it to do. Next, we're going to have a delay node so that it will keep doing this, but it's going to drain our stamina at a quicker rate. Since here we're going to have 0.05 instead of 0.1. So it's going to drain our stamina at twice as fast as we fill it, which kind of makes sense, right? And we'll finish this off with subtract stamina. Let's put a comment over our subtract stamina event. Okay. And now we'll go back up to our input action, and we're going to bring in our subtract stamina event here. We plug this guy in right there. And then we're actually going to drag off of our max walk speed here, and we're going to plug this into add stamina. This way, every time that we stop sprinting, even if whether we run out, whether we stop by running out, or whether we stop by letting go of the sprint key, we are going to go into our add stamina function. Let's compile and save. Now before we test this out, we want to be able to see our stamina bar, because right now we won't be able to tell if our stamina is draining properly. So we'll create a widget for that. Now this isn't going to be a big lesson on widgets, so it's just going to be super simple. We'll just have a little bar down at the bottom. But for sake of debugging, I think this is going to be something we need. So let's go into our sprint folder. Let's right click under user interface. Let's create a widget blueprint. We'll call it WBP underscore stamina bar. Let's open this up. First thing that we're going to do is throw in a progress bar into our canvas panel. And we're going to move this down to the bottom, and let's make it a little bigger here. We'll just call this stamina bar. We'll leave it as a variable, and we will also anchor this to the center bottom half of the screen. So we'll compile, save that, and now in our event graph, we're going to create a reference to our character. Let's get player character. Let's cast to our third person character. Connect the pins, and then we are going to promote this to a variable and just call it character ref. This way we can get our stamina values so we can display them on the progress bar. Now we'll compile, save, go back to the design tab. With the progress bar selected, we're going to scroll over to the percent and create binding. Let's drag the return node down. We're going to get our character reference, drag off and get the current stamina. And then we also want to grab our max stamina, and we want to divide the two, and this will get us a percentage for what our health is. Boom, boom. We're all connected. Compile and save. So now our progress bar is all set to go. Let's just close out of that. Back in our character, we now need to add that to the viewport here. So let's drag off, begin play. Let's get our player controller. Create widget. Set that widget to the one that we just created, stamina bar. Plug this in. And then also, of course, we need to add it to viewport. That way we can actually see it. And with that, let's compile and save. I know that was super quick, but we just want to get past the basics so we can get onto the fun stuff. Alright, now we'll test. As you can see, that stamina bar's there. Now we'll run around. Nothing's happening to the stamina bar because we're not sprinting yet. Now we're sprinting, and you can see we're both going fast and draining the stamina bar at the same time. Now that that stamina bar is emptied, it has stopped us from sprinting, and the stamina bar is filling up. And now we're sprinting and draining the bar again, and let's see if it'll fill up at max, and then we'll be all set to go. Alright, looks like we're working so far. Alright, now the first big thing that we're going to do is we are going to create an effect where the camera will zoom out when we're sprinting, and that way we can kind of get this cool feel like we're, going super fast. And this one's pretty easy too. So the first thing that we're going to need is a new variable that we are going to call is camera zoomed out. The next thing that we're going to need, let's scroll over, let's go up here, get some empty space, is we're going to need a couple new custom events. First one, we're going to call move camera back, and then just below it we're going to create a new custom event, and we're going to call that move camera forward. Now starting with our move camera back, what we're going to do is we're going to get a branch, and we are going to check if we are zoomed out or not. And what this check is it's not a check to see if we should be zoomed out, but it's a check to make sure that we're not already zoomed out before we zoom out again. Otherwise it'll kind of shift between zooming in and zooming out, and it'll just be kind of weird. So off of false, we are going to add a new timeline, and we're just going to call this camera zoom. And then we're going to move our executable from play to play from start. And now let's define this timeline. Alright, so the first thing that we need is a float track. Let's just call this zoom track. And then we don't want this transition to be super long. We kind of want it to be a little quicker. So let's just set this to 1. So we'll transition between being, where our camera normally is and being zoomed out in the time of about a second. So for the first key point, we're going to right click and we are going to set the time to 0, and for our value we're going to set this to whatever our camera boom currently is. So let's check our camera boom and we'll look at our target arm length, and that's 300. So right in the value we're going to type in 300, and then we're going to add in a new key, and let's set the time to 1 right at the end. By the time that we're done with this timeline, we should be at let's do 600, so we'll just double the camera length. And then we'll compile. Let's just make sure that these are looking right. Yep. Close out of the zoom track. And then we're going to need a reference to our camera boom. And then we'll drag off of that reference, and we are going to set arm length. Set target arm length. There we go. Plug our track in for our target arm length, and we'll plug the update executionable pin into our set node. And then right after this, we are going to end with stating that we are now zoomed out. Now for zooming the camera forward, it's pretty much the same. So what we're actually going to do here is we're just going to take what we already wrote, and then we are going to copy it down here and just make a few changes here. So since we're zooming forward now, what we're going to do is we're going to break this connection point, and we're going to drag off of true, because now we're making sure that we're zoomed out. We are going to reverse from end, and then for our set boolean here, we're going to untick that to false. Alright, and then we will put a comment around this and just call it camera zoom. And now we're almost done with this functionality here. So what we need to do is go back to our input, and we need to add these to our sprinting system. The first one is going to go right after our subtract stamina here. While we have the sprint action pressed, we want to make sure that we zoom the camera back. So we're going to type in camera, move camera back. Next, we need to set it so when we are no longer sprinting, the camera moves forward. Now, once again, we have multiple ways to end our sprint. One of them being letting go of the button, but the other being when we run out of stamina. So over here, right after our second branch node here, we're going to grab another move camera forward and plug that in here. And with that, we finished our zoom track. So let's compile and we'll save and let's test it out. Okay, so we're moving around here, and then we are sprinting, and it does zoom out, and it is zooming back in when we let go of the sprint key. And then let's try and run our stamina to 0 and see if it zooms us back in again automatically, which it does. Perfect. Looks like we're working just as we want it to. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is learn how to attach particle effects that trigger only when we're running. But first, I did notice that we don't really have much space to run. So before we go any further, let's just take a second to stretch out the walls a bit. So let's pause for just 2 seconds and do that here, and I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, and now we're back with a little more space. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to use anim notifies to tell our character when to spawn these particles that we attach to bones. So to do that, first we're going to have to go into our run animation. So let's open up our mannequin in animations, and let's get our run, third person run here. And we're just going to pause this guy just so it's a little less busy. So what you can see here is we've got some notify tracks here. Now what we're going to do is we are going to insert a couple notify tracks. I think actually we just need one. And then we are going to right click inside here, and we're going to add a notify. Select new notify, and then let's just name this one step effect 1. And then let's also right click and let's add another new notify, and we're just going to call this step effect 2. Now let's rotate our character to the side, and we need to position these to go off when our character takes a step. So we've got our animation here, so the first one we'll probably want right about here, and then let's go to the end of the animation when our left foot hits the ground, and we will put step effect 2 over there. Okay, now that we have these notifies in place, we need to go to our animation blueprint and add the functionality for when these are called. So we can just go ahead and put that to the side there. Let's select our animation graph or animation blueprint here. Go to the event graph, and now those animation notifies that we created, those should actually show up as events, just like our update animation here. So we'll right click, type in step effect, add event notify step effect 1. Let's add the second one as well, and event anim notify step effect 2. Kind of a bit of a mouthful, but hey. Actually, before we get started building the functionality for this, we're going to need a reference to our character. So let's go all the way back up here. And we're going to drag off of try get pawn owner, and we are going to cast to our third person character. And we're going to drag that down to the end of the graph here. We can even put a reroute node just for ease of visibility. There we go. Plug this in here. And then of course we're going to promote this to a variable. Just call it character ref. And there we go. Okay, now back in our anim notify, if you remember in the character blueprint, we created a Boolean variable called isSprinting. And now we want to be able to call that, so we're going to bring in our character reference, and we're going to get isSprinting. And we're going to throw in a branch real quick to check if we're sprinting. Because again, we don't want this effect to show up unless, we're actually sprinting. Now if it's true, we are going to spawn an emitter at location. And now we're going to need a reference to our character mesh, and we're going to get that from our character reference here. So drag off and get mesh. Let's see, where is he at? Get mesh. Ah, there we go, get mesh. And now we're going to, off of mesh, we're going to get a socket location. Whoops. Get socket location here. Let's plug the return value in for our location. And now we're going to need a socket name, which is going to come from our skeleton, a bone on our skeleton, for where we want the effect to show up. So let's go into our skeleton here, go to our skeleton tree, and we want our foot, let's see, foot right. Yep, that's what we want here. We're going to have to type in the bone name exactly as it appears here. So it's all lowercase, foot underscore R. It's back in our animation graph. Foot underscore R. And now we are just about set. Now we're also going to need an emitter, because if we don't have an emitter, then we're not actually spawning anything. So I don't think that there's that much in the starter kit besides maybe explosion. This might get a little bit loud, but I'll just turn the volume down. And that's step effect 1. Now for 2, we're just going to do the exact same thing. So let's just copy everything here. And we are going to change the bone. Now we can assume that it's just foot underscore R, but let's just double check to make sure. Or L, excuse me. Looks like foot underscore L is correct. So let's just change that R to an L. And we should be all set for that. Let's compile and save. And let's test what we have so far. Okay, so we're running around. And it looks like it's working here. We're creating an explosion every time we step here. And then once we stop, we're no longer doing that. Then we sprint again, and there we go. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on some functionality for giving our character the ability to damage enemy targets, or enemies that he runs by. Let's close out of the skeleton, and then let's also close out of the animation blueprint. We aren't going to need that. We'll go back, and then let's go to our third person blueprint. And we need to add a couple of variables real quick inside the character blueprint. First one being health, and the second one being we'll just call it isDead. And the health one, we want to change that to a float, and we will leave isDead as a Boolean. Okay, so let's compile and save. We'll go back out. Now we're going to duplicate our character and create an enemy character class. So we're just going to call this BP underscore test enemy. And let's move this test enemy over to our sprint folder. We'll open that up. And now we don't need any of this functionality, because just for the sake of this demo, this character is just going to stand still. So the first thing that we're going to work on is the ability, so to speak, for this character to take damage. So let's right click and we're going to type in any damage and find the event any damage node. Zoom in a little more. And first let's drag in our health and we're going to get that. And then we are going to subtract that from the damage taken here. And now we're going to set our health once again to our health minus the damage. And next we need to check and make sure that this damage doesn't kill our player, and then separate our functionality out based off of whether our character's dead or not. So let's hold B, get a branch node, and once more we're going to get our health. Well, let's drag off of our health and get less than or equal to 0. And then plug that in for our condition. And now, just to keep it simple, we're going to create a new function and we're going to call this a death function. So now any other features that you want to add, like maybe have an explosion when they die, or maybe they get flung or whatever, we will put that in here. So back in our event graph, we're going to drag our death function in here and just connect that to the true pin. So if the character is dead, then we want to call this death function here. Alright, now back in our death function. Now again, there's a lot that we can add to this death function, but for now, we're just going to add some simple ragdoll physics. So let's get a reference to our mesh. We're going to drag off and set simulate physics. Plug this in. And then we want to make sure that simulate is set to true here. So here we're all set for this enemy, and we are going to close him out, and we are now going to add the damaging capabilities in our primary character. Oh, you've already got him open here. Now first we need to go to the viewport tab, because how we're going to do this is we're going to create a new collision volume here. We're going to use that, so whenever the enemy enters that collision sphere, then it's going to take damage and or fly away. So over in our components tab, we're going to add a sphere collision. And we're going to move this forward a little bit. We're also going to increase the scale. Let's just set this to 2.25 in each side. Oops. And there we go. Maybe move this up a little bit just like that. So now the sphere collision is going to be right in front of the player, so that when we sprint, anything that enters the sphere is going to be damaged and flung a certain distance. So let's make sure that the collision is set to overlap all dynamic, which it is. And now we'll go into the event graph and set up what happens next. Alright, so let's find some more empty space. How about back right over here? And with that collision sphere selected, we are going to select on component begin overlap. And let's just move that over here where we were planning on working here. Now make sure that it says the name of your collision sphere that you're using, just to make sure that we are using the right piece. Now the first thing that we're going to need to do is cast to our enemy blueprint here. And since we're casting just to this test enemy, any enemy that we create that's a child of that test enemy, this functionality will also work for those as well. In my mind, modularity is the key, so and that's one way to do that. So let's drag off of other actor, and we are going to cast to our enemy to test. Here we go. And now we want to make sure that this overlap doesn't actually go into place unless we're sprinting once again. So we're going to get our branch, and we are going to do our is sprinting check. We're going to drag off of true, and we're going to get a launch character function. There we go, right at the top. Now we're going to plug the results of our cast into our target. And for the launch velocity, we're going to do just a smidge of math here. We're going to drag off of our character and get our cast and get the actor's forward vector. We're going to get a plus node, vector plus vector. And we want to set the X and Y values to 1000, but then leave the Z at 0. And this is just some numbers that I was playing with that seemed to work, so that's what I'm gonna go with, but you can change this if you want. And then plug that plus node into our launch velocity here. Space this out a little bit, and then finally we're going to add an apply damage node. The damaged actor is once again going to come from our cast. The base damage, let's just set this to 10. I don't think we actually set our health to anything, so let's set the base health to 10 here. Now let's do 20, and that way we can test the two different circumstances of taking damage or the character actually dying too. And then for the damage causer, we need to get a reference to self. There we go. And after this, we could throw in something just for fun. We could throw in a play sound at location, and then have a little explosion for when we hit him, and that way we can kind of tell what's going on a little easier. So let's play sound at location. And then we're just going to get explosion 1 here, and let's do explosion 2. Now for this location here, we want to make sure that the explosion happens where our test enemies hit. So let's drag off and get actor location. And then we are just going to bring this over here, plug this in for our location. Let's do a reroute node just to clean things up a bit. And that's it for damage. Now if we wanted to make it so different characters would play different sounds on death, or if you wanted to randomize them, what you could do here instead is we could disconnect this, and then let's compile and save it, and then we can get our test enemy here, and inside our death function here we could do a play sound at location here, get our actor location, and then for the sound we could just promote this to a variable, call this death sound. And then we would want to make this editable and expose it on spawn, and this way anytime we create a child of this, we can just select the sound that we want from there. For the sound, let's just set this back to explosion 2. So that's how you would damage the character. Now we can test it out real quick. Oh, hold on. So let's get this test enemy, and let's put 1 or 2 here. And then we'll run around and we'll sprint. Oops, that was a little loud. Okay, and now we can see, oh, those guys go into the ground. There's a solution for that, and let me find that real quick. 1 sec. Alright, now to fix it so the enemies don't fall through the floor after you hit them and then they simulate physics, what I did was I went into the test enemy here, I went to the collision, and I changed the collision preset to pawn instead of character. So after I changed that, that's all I did. I didn't change anything else. I did that, and then now all the enemies will just collapse onto the ground after they fly, and that way they don't disappear into the ground. Alright, and that is a few different cool things that you can do to make your character run super fast. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the super speed power. If you got something out of the video, go ahead and give it a like. And if you have a cool power you'd like to see in Unreal, leave it in the comments below.